So powers of attorney, I did touch on this a bit. So it is a very common tool, and I'm sure you guys have all had your interactions with them because it comes up all the time in the banking, or the financial institutions. But basically what it is, it's agreement. So someone says, I'm giving you authority to act on my behalf, and usually powers of attorney, general durable powers of attorney, are very broad, because the whole idea is you're giving someone authority while you have the ability to make your own decisions to help you when you're not able to on your own. So in a lot of ways, it's better to have it broad, because if you make it very limited, and then some situation comes up when you're no longer able to make your own decisions and you're kind of caught, right? And your only option is to get a guardianship. So that's usually the reason why they're drafted that way. And you don't need an attorney to do them. I mean, actually, even our, in our state statute, there is a form, which I know it was a bit, there was controversial, or not everybody agreed with that. We thought it was too easy to have a form. But the other thing is you can get forms. If someone's gonna take advantage, they're gonna figure out to get the form somewhere else. So at least this form complies with the law. So yeah, I said they are usually broad, but the whole idea though is that the agent is supposed to do things that are for the benefit of what they call the grantors, the person who signed the power of attorney, and they're supposed to, as much as possible, make decisions the way they think the grantor wants, and they're not supposed to impose their own beliefs. So, it's not like, well, I think you should do this, and even though the person themselves doesn't agree with that, right? It's not supposed to be that. They're supposed to just be acting as much as possible on behalf of the person in doing what they want to do. The thing, it is effective when it's signed and delivered to the agent. So they sign it and they have to give it to the agent. And actually, under our new statute too, the agent has to sign a paper as well, saying, I understand what my responsibilities are, and I'm willing to take this on. It can end when, the person dies. Some people are under this misunderstanding that somehow power of attorney continues once the person dies, and you can do things, but you can't. The whole idea is it's just valid when you're alive, and that's when the probate process has to potentially take over. Or if there's a trust, that's another way to try to do things outside of probate when somebody dies. The grantor themselves can revoke it, and unless the court is formally found that the person doesn't have the legal capacity to make a decision, in theory they can revoke it. And they don't need to do anything special and then say, I don't want you to do this anymore. And we always recommend people do it in writing. And certainly if a bank has a power of attorney on file and the person no longer wants that agent to act on their behalf, they clearly need to relay that to the bank or whoever, credit union or other third party that has these powers of attorney. So they know that it's no longer, this agent no longer has authority to act on their behalf. I stepped in and already talked about stepping in the shoes of the grantor and making the decisions, and that's really what they should do. There in 2018 there was a Uniform Power of Attorney Act that was passed, and it was good. It creates. I mean, we had a statute before, but this is more detailed, and I think sets things out in a really good way. And I think the thing that's relevant for all you guys is that there are specific provisions related to third parties in the statute. And so they talk about things when I will say I was involved in the work group when this law was being drafted. And I know that attorneys that draft powers of attorney, some of them were frustrated that financial institutions would refuse to accept powers of attorney. And even though, I mean, sure, sometimes I'm sure you have, good reasons to, but the thing is you want to be able to use them if everything is otherwise okay, as far as and not just say, we don't want to accept it because it defeats the whole purpose of having it. So there are provisions in the statute that talks about how you should when you should rely on powers of attorney and things you can do, though, if you think if you have concerns, and then also grounds for when you can refuse to accept them. So really what it says is basically, if a power of attorney is presented to you and it's acknowledged, which means it's notarized and everything on it looks okay as far as you're concerned, then, and you don't have any personal knowledge that this person that's presenting it is there's some wrongdoing. I mean, if you do, then obviously that's a different story. But if everything seems okay, then you really are just supposed to accept it. But if you do have these are the three things you can do, right? If you have a concern for some reason, you can ask, so if you think maybe the agent is trying to pull a fast one over on you, you can ask for the certification that they are actually the agent and have authority to act on this person's behalf. If it's in another language, you can ask for it to be translated. And then if you have other issues about whatever's in the document itself that you think doesn't sound right, you can get an opinion from your counsel on it. And there are timelines for, I think if you go to the next slide, maybe it's, no, I guess I didn't forget. Yeah, oh, there it is, yeah, sorry. So, right, you have 7 days to accept the, to either accept it or ask for those things to happen, right? So you do have a week, I guess, to decide, am I gonna accept this power of attorney or am I gonna ask for one of these three things to happen? But then once you get if you did ask for the certification, translation, legal opinion, you need to then accept it, the power of attorney, within, assuming there's nothing there that causes you to think you shouldn't accept it, you should then honor it within 5 days. And then there is this other provision which talks about when you can refuse it, including actual knowledge. If you know, if for whatever reason you happen to know, well, no, I know that this person, I mean, I guess part of it would be, right, if someone, let's say that principal sends you a letter and says, I don't want this person acting on my behalf anymore, and the next day the agent comes in and says, well, I want to make a withdrawal, right? Well, you can absolutely refuse it because you have this proof that, you have this actual knowledge that you got this letter that this person doesn't want to do it anymore. And certainly it's a very reasonable basis for refusing. And was there something else? No, I guess. Oh yeah, no, I guess that's it. And then other good faith reasons. I mean, if you really do think that there's some reason, like just doesn't seem right, you have a concern, certainly, I think you're justified. I think that's the whole idea. You're not going to get in trouble if you do that. But I think this was more with bigger banks. Like there was a lot of talk about. Well, maybe I'll just say the big national bank that was constantly refusing powers of attorney. And I know that the attorneys were complaining about that because they had these very bureaucratic, I guess, criteria. And so I think that was the reason for putting these things in place to try to prevent some of that from happening. But certainly, I mean, again, because we are saying this thing, these powers of attorney can be a license to steal if it's in the wrong hands. So if you really do think that there's something going on that's bad, then you should feel like you can do something about it, not just accept it. And so if you do violate the statute, so let's say you didn't follow the requirements under the law, you can be subject to getting a court order forcing you to accept the power of attorney and be liable for attorney's fees.
Yes, are you guys running into issues? Because I had this on a case out in Cheshire County where we were asking the scam victim, the family member had power of attorney, and the bank absolutely refused to accept it. We got the lawyer to call, we got the lawyer to write a letter, and they still refused to accept it. It became ridiculous. So is there something we're missing? Or does anyone dare say so?
It's not really so much an issue with you guys as far as, Yeah, I mean, I think it might be the more national things, maybe.
So the perpetrators, what's really sad about this is there's professionals. We have prosecutors, unfortunately, professional criminals who target them are like the scammers.
Right.
But then there's family members, it's primarily the children and sometimes grandchildren. We also have hired professionals. We just reached a plea agreement with an attorney who had abused his powers. We prosecuted a bank manager, we prosecuted financial people, financial advisors and things like that. But the majority of our stuff is with family, which is really difficult because it divides families in a very, very big way. And then there's friends or acquaintances or people who are in a position of trust, sometimes neighbors, sometimes someone who's been a long-term friend. There's sort of case law around State v. Gagne, which was an old friend who moved in to help someone, and it turned into, that woman went to prison and it turned into a Supreme Court case. So, it can be anyone. That's the hard part. So what you might start seeing for some of your folks or for some of your members might be that suddenly there's problems with their bills, there's unpaid bills, they're coming into a little panicked about it. You find out their utilities have been shut off. You suddenly see an uptick. Like we had one case where the woman, honest to goodness, you could have set your clock by when her checks went out. It's just that they were always the same, and suddenly there was this excessive withdrawals. And I love the withdrawals when the person doesn't even have a debit, doesn't use a debit machine ever, and now it's suddenly happening a lot. There might be excessive credit card activity with no goods or service to show for. Basically, they have nothing to show for all the money that's going out, yet they're unable to pay some bills. There might be a disparity between the income, the assets, and the lifestyle. Suddenly there's this big uptick in the lifestyle or a big downfall in the lifestyle. Sometimes we'll see this gets reported, might be from a senior center where the person always went on bus trips and now they can't afford the bus trips anymore. One of my cases, the very first exploitation case I did, was a woman who called me and said, "You've got to do something." The woman was 80, by the way, and her friend was about 81, and it was her ex-husband, funny enough, but they were still buddies. And she went to see him the day after the Social Security check came in and said, "Let's go for coffee." And he says, "I can't go for coffee, I don't have any money." His Social Security check had come the day before. It was a trusted friend who had been ill, and she was doing all this shopping for him. And she was using his credit card, and she diverted all of his credit cards and bank statements to her house, so he wasn't even following anything, and she totally ripped him off. So when you might also see when, on that clip where they said, be sure to tell the bank. Now that we hear this all the time, be sure to tell the bank that you're getting home repairs done, that you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing the other. So when you ask someone, there might be that evasiveness. If they're on the phone while they're trying to do this transaction, it's because they're getting directions. So really, really be alerted to that. And then the sudden account depletion. This new friend thing, we always call it the new best friend, that might be a sign. And especially if there's someone who we're always chatting with you, next thing they're looking to the friend and they won't answer questions, they won't talk to you, they're not as forthcoming as they always were. That might be something going on. There's sudden isolation. Again, we might see this through senior centers, or we might see this through the community where they're always the bubbly person out there and now they're not out there anymore. They're sort of become very homebound. This hard part about this is that these are sometimes signs of aging too. But, just sort of have, your thinking hats on when you see it happening. So if there suddenly is a very abrupt change in their power between, they're coming down saying, and I'm changing all this, and their best friend is with them, be a little alerted. And, I always say, if you're sort of going, it just doesn't feel right, trust your gut. Make a report to APS. Just do it. You have nothing to lose. If you do it in good faith, you have zero to lose, except for another set of eyes looking at it. You also might see that person is just sort of changing. They're disheveled. They were always pristine, and now they're disheveled, and now they're not clean, and now they're just sort of not the person that you've known for 20 years. Because this age group still like to go to meetings. Okay, they like that person. That's socialization for them. So that might be also where you see it. And again, it might be a sign of aging. It might be cognition issues, but it might be that they're getting ripped off really badly. So the things we run into in this is that there's often a huge dependency. We touched on this earlier. And the older person, their physical condition might prohibit them from doing things. We've had people say, well, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know where I could go. That's often it. They've been isolated, as we've mentioned already. And again, cognitive impairments. They become huge targets for, unfortunately, family members when their cognition starts to decline, because they aren't keeping an eye on things anymore. So we have this in here because he did a great testimony in front of Congress on elder abuse and exploitation. He was exploited by his stepchildren, financially exploited by his stepkids. So this isn't, there's no socioeconomic boundaries on this. It's everybody. Same with scams. Most of the people I've spoken to who have been really badly scammed have had a tremendous amount of money. They've been very bright, they've been very educated, and they've been very ripped off.
So there is, I mean, I think it was even mentioned in the 6-minute clip there that it is a hugely underreported crime or event. And for the reasons we talked about before, the victims are usually ashamed, or they're embarrassed, or it's their family member and they don't want to get them in trouble, whatever it is. The thing is, we only know, like, I think the tip of the iceberg probably what the problem is anyway. I mean, we already know it's this huge amount of money that's involved, but I think it's probably fair to say it's even more than that, what we know, unfortunately. Special knowledge and skills. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing too. People need to be aware of what those signs are that we just talked about to know how to really respond to if it's really a problem. So sometimes people won't know, well, like, gosh, that looks like they're being exploited. And so it doesn't happen. Or maybe people don't realize about, we're going to talk about the reporting statute, mandatory reporting statute. And yeah, we talked about this, the victims, and I said this before, sometimes they don't even realize they're being exploited. They think their new best friend is great, and they don't realize they're slowly stealing all their money. And all these other things we talked about, fear, shame, and disbelief, and they're dependent on this person. They don't want to get them in trouble. Fear of being placed, we said before, in a nursing home or under a guardianship. Yeah. So, is there one slide before? Yeah. So, anyway, we'll just go really quick over this. So there are some ways civilly that we can, New Hampshire legal assistance, where we can help, or some people, they can do it on their own, but certainly changing the power of attorney is one, revoking it if it's the bad part, after, and just getting that thing stopped. You can go to court and get accounts frozen, you can get restraining order potentially, you can get this person signed up with money management services, so there's a person that's capable of managing it if they can't do it themselves. I mean, if it's necessary, certainly for us, I mean, we don't personally seek guardianships on behalf of people, but if it's really the thing to do, maybe that is what needs to happen. They just need to have a guardian appointed, and then also injunctions. And as far as getting money back, so this is what I would say for these scams and stuff, I mean, good luck ever getting the money back. It's like, whether it's in Jamaica, wherever it is, I think it's pretty unlikely they're ever gonna get the money back. And even then with civil cases, if it's a matter of the person, the money being taken and spent, then it's probably that it's gone, right? But where we have the most success, and I'm not saying it's impossible because we have been successful in doing that, but usually which is a common act of exploitation we see, is when the adult child convinces the parent to sign the house over to them, and with this verbal promise that they can live there forever. And then the next thing you know, it's like, oh no, we can't stay here. We had one case where the house was given into them free and clear, and then the adult child mortgaged the thing up to the hilt, then couldn't afford to make the payments, and told them, well, sorry, we're gonna have to sell the house now because we can't afford it anymore. And so we were able to go to court and get the sale stopped, and we were able to work out a deal where they actually paid the mortgage, the son and the daughter-in-law, while our client was able to stay in the house until she had to go to nursing home. So there's things we can do that way. And there's also things like under a power of attorney, you have the right to ask for an accounting from the agent to see how they've spent the money. And these are just different legal remedies, which we don't need to get into, but there are ways civilly where we can try to recover the assets.
On the scams, if someone happens to tell you that I think I just made a huge mistake, I think I sent money to a scammer, if you do it within, say, 24 hours, sometimes it's mailed within the United States first and then out of the country, you can get in touch with postal inspectors and they can often intercept the packages. And so that's a huge one. Usually they don't report as quickly, but there is that odd time they do, and we have been successful in having the postal inspectors intercept for us at the other end, which is
That's good,
really
yeah,
good to know. So this is the new law. Are any of you using this at all? It's the banking.
Yay.
So glad to hear.
I feel like I'm best friends with like the people at DHS right now. Like,
Oh, good, because you have to report to them, yeah.
Yes.
Tell me, so Kate, would you mind sharing how it's working for you?
I mean, it's hard. It's been difficult to navigate where we're supposed to intervene, where we're supposed to stop everything altogether, stop a member from even taking money. And then the whole sending everything to the banking commission, that part we got a little confused on as well, because it was like, okay, so we send it to you, and then we send it to you again, like, how are we keep sending it and reporting it as long as we're holding it?
Each time.
Each time. And then just, it's definitely a better way of sending all the documents now, to be able to send your email instead of picking up the phone and leaving a message and then waiting for somebody, is how it was for a while. So it's definitely better because we're getting in contact, like we're getting phone calls back from them faster. So it's.
Are you finding the 15-day thing too prohibitive?
We've only used that probably like twice so far.
Okay.
And it was hard for us to navigate it all at first, because it was like just when everything came into, like the law came into effect, and all of a sudden it was like the 2 times that we used it. So I feel like going forward we'll be better about figuring out how to do the 15-day thing, but.
Well, one of the things that say, well, you can get extensions on that too, and things like that. There can be extensions. You report to the commission within 7 days, but they can extend it for another 25 days. But one of the things, but you have to, petition for that. But one of the things we're sort of encouraging everybody to do is, when we did this, we modeled it, myself and Brian worked for the banking commission. Poor Cheryl had worked for years trying to get just this. Just giving a way to freeze accounts, because we see so many people stolen through banks and through their credit unions. So we were trying to just get a way to freeze funds to protect them, but we haven't seen very many people using it. There's a starting point, yeah.
In the RSA, it's referencing a certain age demographic, where it says an 18-year-old or older than 18 that's
vulnerable.
determined to be vulnerable. How do you handle it in situations where you have an adult in their 50s, that they're not in that older generation, but they're clearly a victim and they don't realize that they're a victim?
Do you think they're vulnerable?
I don't think that they're, mentally vulnerable or in that state. I think they just think that they're being.
So I guess I have two thoughts on it. To me, when someone really thinks that they're like, say, going to win $1 million and they're going to send up all of their life savings for that $1 million, I think immediately this is some issue with their thinking, and they are vulnerable because they're not going to be able to afford to live. That would be kind of my rationale. The other part is that you are covered by immunity if you reasonably believe that there's, fraud being perpetrated. And so there's that immunity in that instance also, but also making an APS report immediately as well. I think then you're covered, because you've acknowledged that we're worried, we think they're vulnerable, we think they're gonna lose their life savings, we're very worried about this. And we have a statute in place for that purpose. So I think you would be covered. I always tell people, seek out legal counsel on it from your own bank, but that would be my take on it, and that was our hopes. The thing we did, when we did it, we sort of mimicked or mirrored the one that was being used for securities, and I'll be very frank, it was because they ran into zero resistance in the passing of that law. So we were looking for the path of least resistance. They have since been able to extend their timelines because they were finding it wasn't enough time. And so we would encourage folks to start reporting to the banking commissions, whoever you report to, talk to them, because when it comes up, we're going to have the statistics. DHHS collect all those statistics, and they will be bringing them. They have to report them to the legislature in the next period. And if we're gonna try and amend it and make it better, it's gonna be because we get feedback from credit unions and we get feedback from banks on how can we do this better for you. Our big thing was protecting the victims, but it's not gonna work if it doesn't work for you. You know what I mean?
What about, we have, one person that we did, refer over. The member didn't do any other banking at any other institution, and she's now calling us and ignoring the calls from the state because she doesn't want to even deal with it. And, we say it's confidential, we can't get into that, you just answer their questions. And she really feels, and it's true, it is from us, and she wants for us to explain that. And she doesn't want to talk.
She doesn't want to talk to APS,
No.
and she doesn't have to, by the way.
Okay.
It's live for your dad.
So they said that, and she wants to know why we did, and we just, in a general sense, we're saying institutions can for these reasons.
Do you know what I would say to her? Say, did you know that New Hampshire's a mandatory reporting state? And that if people don't report, it's a misdemeanor? And none of us wants to be responsible for it. None of us wants a misdemeanor on our record. It is. And we will be talking about that. So I think saying to her, we can't talk about it, but it could be anyone who's worried about you because we're all mandated reporters. It could be your neighbor, it could be your family, it could be your friends.
Okay, perfect. I referred her to the RSA.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you.
But that's how, when people call us, that's what I do. So.
She wants a meeting and she wants us to meet with them and I'm like.
So what I would suggest is say, it's APS who are talking to you. I would suggest you really sit down and talk. You don't have to, but I would. Get them to explain it to you, because it's in their hand. But APS can go knock on doors. We've sent them to the most horrendous scenes, like you worry about the person, it's filthy, it's everything, and they knock on the door and you can smell the house before you even get to the house, and you open the door and the woman says, no, thank you, boom. That's it, done. They're shut down. So it is a choice. People do not have to take those services.
Yeah.
Which is really hard for APS, by the way.
Yeah, you can also explain whatever she tells them is confidential too, so she doesn't have to worry about them. Because we were just talking for hours, it's very hard for the Bureau of Adult Services to release any information to anybody about investigation.
Which makes us a little crazy at
It
times.
can
Very-
be frustrating, actually, yeah, so.
They can release information with us because we're in law enforcement, but otherwise it's
Right.
not. Their statute prohibits them from sharing, and which is really hard because when we have reports made to them, and like banks have said to us, citizens have said to us, everybody said to us, we never hear from them. And it's like, that doesn't mean nothing happened, we assure you. Sometimes they just can't tell you what's going on, but they are in the reports, and if you get a report and you think, oh, well, nothing's happening anyways, and the same person comes again, you make another report, because it's gonna be in their records then. And, it's basically, you're obliged to, but also it means that they're in the radar still. And each time there's a report, if they suspect vulnerability, they have to reach out to that person, so.
I think my question or my comment kind of lies in this area, because we were dealing with a gentleman who really is a very sound mind, very successful man, feels like he's already taken care of his family and now there's this extra money and he's helping people in Vietnam that he believes he knows.
Is he a vet himself?
I'm sorry?
Is he a veteran?
No, he happened to have business over in that area. But anyways, his whole thing is, we've had the conversations. He would say, actually, we removed his debit card because he was actually giving them the debit card. So that was his access. But, it was interesting because he was moving the funds from another institution to our institution so that he could have the funds to send. So it was a real challenge because in his mind, hey, this is my money, and we went through so much trying to explain. And I don't know if there was a reference to, we just want to take care of you, we want to be sure, and he had said that he had already met with somebody from DHHS. Yeah. And so of course we don't know what the results are. And I think that's what's kind of challenging for us, because I'm so far down this path and yet I really don't have as much information.
Yeah.
And in his case, we had to close this account,
And from what he was saying, was very likely is he did meet with DHHS and said, I am absolutely fine. I have made this choice. It's my money. I can do with my money as I please. This is That
It's
is what,
true,
you're
yeah.
allowed to self-determination.
People can
You
have a
know,
right to
and-
make bad decisions unless they, if they're,
That's what we're
Otherwise
getting to when we're
confidence, yeah.
asking the questions. We had two separate incidents, same branch. One lady wanted to take out $100,000 in 20s.
Oh, of course.
And when we asked what it was for, she said, oh, I'm buying land. And of
Cash
course-
and twenties.
And of course, my lending background, I'm like, there's no closing agent on this planet that's gonna take cash. So when we pressed her, she got very frustrated, said, it's my money, I know the risks, I can do what I wanna do. And, we asked her for the purchase agreement, she wouldn't provide it. And I think the end result was we decided not to do the transaction. We had another instance the following week, totally different. Gentleman wanted to take out $50,000 because he was probably gonna pay off a debt in the future. Again, he wanted small bills, and we pressed and asked the questions, and you get the, it's my money, I can do what I want, I know what I'm doing. So what do you do?
You make a report if they're over 60, you make a report to the police about your concerns, and then you gotta let it go, I'm afraid, and that's the hardest thing. I walk out of places saying to people, just if anything else, just promise me you won't send them any more money. And a lot of times they can't look me in the face and say they won't, and it's, unfortunately, they're allowed to make really bad decisions. And I've talked to blue in the face on this stuff with people directly, but keep asking questions. I have also had people say, I wish the bank had pushed me harder. I'm going, what else can they do?
Right.
I said that, if they asked you, they addressed it, and she said, well, I did, I've had one woman say, I did get really frustrated. I said, and she goes, I know. You know what I mean? But they're feeling stupid at this point, and they just wish someone had been able to stop them. So they're casting a little bit of blame anywhere they can. But at the same time, if you call them on it, they bring it back to themselves. So, but it's, my only hope always is that someone says something and something resonates.
Right? And they hesitate. I mean, we don't wanna scare the crap out of these people, but
I do
kind
at
of
this
do.
point, frankly, I do.
You can't get the stack if something
Right,
happens,
right,
but
right.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and saying, just asking the questions, are you willing to share it? Because I'd be very worried if you don't have sales and purchase for land, like those sorts of questions, at least get them thinking on it, and just saying, you realize like, it might be illegal if you're sending cash like this overseas, it might be illegal to mail it in the mail, and, just little things,
Yeah, so maybe
yeah, just
hopefully
the
get
fact
them.
that it was 100,000 in 20s, my
This-
immediate thought was elder abuse.
Well,
Yes.
right, I mean, because right.
Yeah,
What it was, that's an interesting, God knows what they're doing with that, $20.
Anything.
You buy Bitcoin.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
So good news is that the feds do have a new Bitcoin task force stationed right here in Manchester.
That's awesome.
So that's really nice news. Who are investigating and trying to follow exploitation cases using crypto. So, yeah, so the two agents on it right now.
Do they visit, I mean, I know it's not so much the, businesses that hold these Bitcoin kiosks, but like, do they go and do like a little perusal every so often to those businesses,
I
just
wish
to give them a
they
little,
would. I think they're well.
Because I feel like they should be held accountable as well for their Bitcoin machines that they know, like.
Are being used for exploitation.
That they
Yeah.
don't know, that this old lady coming in that's 85 years old is coming in and using their machine. She's
Here in
85
Manchester?
years old. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, using the 85-year-old lady doing, you know what I mean, like.
Yeah, they give them directions. They in fact will talk to them on the phone all the way down to the Bitcoin machine, and they'll talk them through exactly
Tell
what
them
to do.
which one to go to
Yeah.
and all that, so then it like makes me wonder, like, the people that own these Bitcoin,
Should they be held
what is
accountable?
their responsibility
Yeah.
for their machines?
Well, it is interesting, I mean, it's not.
It's a great
It's
question.
like with the Western Union cards, right? I mean, that was
Oh.
another way to,
But they were sued, they were sued,
Like,
and they
Yeah.
did have to pay, and that's
Yeah.
your next hope, you know?
Yeah,
Sorry.
because it seems, honestly, just to me, seems like Bitcoin is just a scam, I don't know, but.
Yeah.
So the criminal remedies, by the way, I'm sorry, we're over time here, but the criminal remedies are prosecution, we for theft by unauthorized taking, forgery, fraud. We also do Medicaid fraud cases, we do social security cases. But there's just an array of charges we can bring in some of these exploitation cases, and we do. So the financial exploitation law, we already told you about, this came into effect in 2015. We amended in 2016 to include, we had the list of, coercion, undue influence and all that, but we wanted something that said knew or should have known that they didn't have the capacity to do this. And so that got added in. Cheryl was very instrumental in this law coming into play. I think we've covered a lot of this. We do impose criminal penalties. So if it's 1,000 or above, it is a class B felony, 1,500 above is class A felony, and under 1,000 is a misdemeanor. So we do charge, and most of our cases are felonies. We do get to investigate things. We go concurrent with sometimes DHHS, the Department, Adult Protective Services. We can work with them on these cases. That is how the cases come to us. All of our cases come either directly from law enforcement or they come through Adult Protective Services. So how it happens is the report's made, then there's an investigation by APS. If they also send it to us, the county attorneys and law enforcement, so that we all receive it when they think there's criminal activity. So we review, when Cheryl was talking about statistics, we believe 1 in 14 people report. We're reviewing 2,000 reports a year for criminal activity. So multiply that by 14 and that'll tell you what's not reported, which is really sad. So what we want to have we're doing it, we do prosecute, we want accountability, we want punishment, and we always ask for restitution. Don't get blood out of a stone, but we still try every single time. And at least probation and parole can try and go after it, because Department of Corrections are who collect on restitution. This is Stacey Elvis Guzman and Sterling Pimentel were the 2 cases. Those were the railing scam guys who came into the state, and they hit, I want to say, some astronomical amount of towns. And we did work with 14 different victims. In the course of 5 days, they collected $110,000 in the state of New Hampshire. Mr. Guzman was staying in a lovely hotel in Portsmouth, unfortunately. But we had 2 really great police departments. It was Keene, I believe it was Londonderry, who jumped right on it. And actually, one fellow did a sting for us. He was 81. He did a sting for us, and that's how we arrested Mr. Guzman. But this is a case where Mr. Guzman is currently in the state prison for 5 to 15, maybe it is. And Starlin did 1.5 because he actually turned states and he gave us a lot of information so we could prosecute. These folks were out of Canada and out of Costa Rica, is where their headquarters were. So as I said, this is all these reports come from everybody and anybody. It goes to B's, it goes to local law departments, and then it goes on to us. And when I say us, it's elder abuse, but it also goes on to county attorneys, and it also goes to our Medicaid fraud unit, because if there's any abuse or exploitation of someone in a nursing facility, our Medicaid fraud are who deal with that. And this is our mandatory reporting law. I'm betting you all know about it, but use it as a tool when you're talking to people and they're very upset that you're reporting anything. This year?
Oh, yeah, vulnerable. I mean, the law changed a while ago. It used to be called incapacitated, but the word vulnerable, really, it is a broad definition. And I think, again, it's in good faith, you're making this determination. No one's expecting you to get an evaluation done or have some medical opinion. So you just think someone seems vulnerable. It really is their physical, mental, emotional ability is just limited in some way that makes it difficult for them to either like make financial decisions or other things. So if you just think someone seems confused or whatever, right, making a crazy
short
decision.
period of time, right?
Yeah. It doesn't have to be
I'm
a
thinking of a
permanent.
grandparent scam,
Yeah.
they're normally perfectly fine, they're mentally capacity, they're fine, but in that moment, they're stressed and emotions.
Yeah, again, if it's a good faith, effort, if you really just think you're really concerned and that you really do think this person has something going on that maybe makes them vulnerable, I think you should just do it, yeah.
Unfortunately, we've gotten pretty good at identifying
Yeah,
stuff coming in because we see so much of it.
Yeah, which is really
I know,
unfortunate.
unfortunate, yes. This is just
all this, it's the illegal use of anyone's home.
yeah, and that's just our state definition for purposes of the Bureau of Elder and Adult Services, yeah.
And, yeah, so the way you all know about reporting, and we also say, you know, if it's sort of outside, say it's a Saturday morning, some of you folks are open, you can report to your local law enforcement, and then they're responsible for reporting to the Adult Protective Services, because Adult Protective Services only do regular working hours. So that's how you do that, and this is the immunity. You are immune. If you're doing something in good faith, you are immune from any sort of prosecution. So the ways to respond, I don't know if some of you, I know St. Mary's Bank has a representative on the FAST team, which is Financial Abuse Specialty Team. It's a multidisciplinary team, which has bankers, law enforcement, attorney generals, U.S. attorneys, sheriff. It's just a myriad of people who really try and work on things. We've also hired someone who's gonna be working on getting some of these exploitation cases more to counties, because we're very limited in our resources. There's one prosecutor, a second one hopefully coming on board fairly soon, but we're limited as to how much we can do. So we do also have, under FAST, we have the subset of who will do case studies and then move those cases forward in prosecution. So also assisting service providers with expertise and talking about it. We go all over the state, literally from Pittsburgh, Berlin, down to Nashua, talking about this stuff. We can also, we're providing the education, and that was one of the things we said at the beginning. We think, Walter said, we think one of the only ways we can combat some of this is through the education and encouraging people to talk about it. So, and then, as we said, New Hampshire FAST, if any of you are interested, reach out to me. Walter has all of my contact information, and we can get you connected to that. It's just a multidisciplinary team of good people, and sometimes it's just walking away with the valuable information. The cryptocurrency Fed agents will be talking to our group in September, I believe it is, things like that, so.
Oh, and we did create a website called Stay Connected New Hampshire, is it .org?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually Walter was very, he helped donate some funds to help us get that going. We had an ad campaign now a couple of years ago, but that TV commercials are super expensive. And maybe you saw it, but they weren't anymore.
But the website is being revived by
Yes.
a new person we brought in on a grant, and so she's really keeping it very, very vibrant and alive. So here you go, the resources, it's here, and so that's most of our contact information. And additional information, you giving this to folks, these PowerPoint?
We'll be able to share it. Yeah.
There you go. Does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry we went way over time, I apologize.
It's the first time we've done this thing together.
Yes, since before COVID, it's the first time.
Would you be willing to do presentations for the credit union?
We absolutely do presentations on scams to credit union members and things like that. We would do it to credit unions. We talk to anyone we'll talk to us, frankly. That's the very honest truth. Cheryl and I go out, I also go out with Brian Townsend, who is the prosecutor in my unit. And that we do to community, like say you want to bring your members in for a presentation on scams, we do that all over the place.
Great.
We did 4 last week because it was World Culture Abuse Awareness.
Do you have any cards or anything?
I don't know if I have one with me because I took them out the other day. I'll write down.
I'll leave mine with you.
Perfect, and I will send you an email as soon as I get back.
Great.
Let me do this at the time right now. We got about 12:30. We have lunch for everyone who's here. Please help yourself. I have a tablet up here. If you would kindly sign your name and your credit union so we can have a list of who attended today. And most important, I think, please, here's an email address, if you would, communications@ccua.org. If you would kindly send an email to communications@ccua.org and let me know what you thought of today's presentation.
Sure.
I think something like this is very, very important. I also think we should be doing this every year. It's a refresher because when you look at the gravity of what's going on with financial exploitation, and not just to seniors, but across the board, I think we need to stay on top of our game. And the more we can stay up to date, like what Sonny and Cheryl were saying about the FAST committee, it's constantly changing, and the more we can stay up to date on it, the better we could be in preventing these kind of scams from particularly hurting our members. So I just think it's important. So again, communications@ccua.org. Please send me an email. Let me know what you thought of today's presentation. And I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you all as well, and Sonny and Cheryl for being our presenters.